Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 21 of the podcast. We hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you are watching myself and Maurizio today. Um, I think we set out last time on the principle that this was going to be a two-parter, and this is the second part of that. So if you want to kind of catch up on things, go back, watch episode 20 and you'll pretty much catch the gist of it. What we wanted to talk about over the series of these two podcasts was, I suppose, an evolution of how we're thinking about the sales process. We've talked the last few weeks about that notion of sales-led to buyer-led, buyer-led really thinking about, well, actually, how do we do those three things that we've kind of talked about internally at Stockpress for a long time: easy to use, easy to buy, easy to sell. I think what we want to talk about today is an evolution of those things that have happened in SaaS selling in general, and the SaaS industry in general, which is those three things: easy to use, easy to buy, and easy to sell, are only good if a few other things actually tie onto them as well. So that's what we want to talk a little bit about today, is the extension of those things. So the other things that we're going to introduce today, we'll open this up in a second with Maurizio, is this notion that you've got those three things, but we also want then for it to be easy to implement, easy to adopt, easy to scale. And I think that's a really important one. And then also we're going to chat today a little bit about, like, well, actually as a business, like, what are we doing to kind of track those things and know that we're on the right path to help our customers achieve that. So let's go from the top. So this buyer journey, they've got to the point of, deciding that they want to run with you. And it's like, and I think the way that we've talked about this in behind the scenes is, you've made the sale. Now what? Like, Maurizio, take it away.
Yeah, before we get started, I'm very excited about this episode because, similar to my shirt right here, bucket list, you need two things. This is a two-part episode, and we are just missing the ice. Who wants to drink a hot beer or a not freezing cold beer
Yeah.
in July? Nobody wants that. Nobody wants just the first part of this two-part episode. Um, so we've talked a lot about the experience element, and in my experience, pun intended, what I find is, and speaking specifically on the SaaS front, you hear this term, you shelf it and that's it. The sort of like the buying committee or the decision maker committee sometimes is not the user. So some companies decide just to keep the decision making process on on ultimate decision maker level and not user level. So
Yeah.
when it comes to the implementation, teams that don't know what the product is for, or implementations that are very long, very complex, that even thinking about them gives you migraines. That tends to be a headache, even if the user is part of the buying process.
Yeah.
Let alone if they're not, it's even worse. But the implementation process, in order to reduce the probability of your solution to being shelved and not used, and you having, there's a term in SaaS called sleeping dogs. It's those companies, those clients that really pay for your product but really don't use it. That's
Yeah.
a churn, waiting to happen. And if you're not delivering value, then you're tough out of luck. There's another stronger for it, but want to keep this curse friendly. Um, so yeah, I'll start with that. The implementation needs to be top notch. It needs to be ideally quick, easy, and if it's not quick or not easy because you have a solution that is not quick or easy or easy to implement, there needs to be a lot of hand holding and a lot of like back and forth and proactiveness to to prevent
Yeah.
those solutions on being shelved. So I would start there.
Yeah.
Implementation needs to be crucial.
Yeah, and I think as a guiding principle for that, I think something again we talk about a lot with Stockpress is we've always had a focus on time to value. We've always had a focus on, actually how do you take those people through the steps that, we perceive they need to go through to get to the point where they have that aha moment. But I think the one thing that we've been really focused on recently and, it really rooting the experience of implementation is this doesn't have to be about everything all at once. Like what we really want to make sure is that actually your next project or your next event or your next campaign is easier to run than your last one was. So if you've got all of these digital asset management, these digital assets that you want to manage, it's not necessarily about can you get your lifetime's work into a platform straight away. What's really important is that you're going to be producing assets along the way for the next thing you're doing. And actually a great implementation step is how do we get that campaign running nicely? How do we get those assets that are being produced in there? And then we can worry about the rest as we go along. And I think that really ties into not just implementation, but the second thing on this list, which is adoption. Like implementation is one thing, and it tends to be those power users that are involved in the implementation. That doesn't necessarily mean that adoption is exactly the same thing. And again, what I mean by that is if you can stand something up quickly and get it using it quickly, that's when adoption really comes into play, because what you're really showing people within the organization around you is something that's baked that they can also see the value in as well. So for me, that adoption side of things is you've got your implementation sorted. How easy can you make it to have other people in the platform working together with you? And I think why that's important for us in particular is that we really tried to change the mindset around adoption with file management, digital asset management, call it what you want. And for us, the part of that process was how do you kind of file sharing, file management is a viral process, naturally viral process. So actually, how do you get rid of silos? The way we got rid of silos was by saying we're not going to charge for users, we're not going to charge for admins, we're not going to charge for teams. We want everyone to be in a space that they can all work together, because that way you're breaking down these silos and actually adoption becomes much more easy and like much more fit for purpose. So that's one of the methods that you can use for that adoption. But it's like anything, if you've got a system that takes a long time to stand up, you can pretty much guarantee that everyone's lost interest by that point. Everyone feels like it's complicated. So I would argue that naturally you're going to see your adoption go down or not get adoption in the first place, which then really impacts that third thing that we talk about, which is the ability for something to scale. And that's the ability for something to scale, not just from the perspective of us as the product owner, but also, as the customer, you want to be able to scale things as well. So Maurizio, I don't know if you can kind of take what I've talked about in terms of adoption there and then lean into that idea of like, well, actually, when you're buying something, you want it to be easy to implement, you want it to be easy to adopt, because ultimately the goal for everyone is how do we get this thing to scale? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I was listening to you, I don't know why, and probably people are going to hate me for this, but this analogy just came to my head recurrently, and I'm just going to use it. And it's a running analogy. So in the implementation phase, you're like, let's say, like me, it's January 1st. Pretty much I'm barely considered the runner. I can't ram for shit. And then as I looked at the implementation plan, like the training plan, I was like, all right, it's like thinking through what needs to happen for you to be successful. And then in my mind, made the stupid decision of actually registering for the New York Marathon in November. And, you should take like a year and a half to prep for your first marathon. I took 11 months, but whatever, YOLO. So in your implementation plan, if everything goes perfectly, then Mauricio is going to survive the New York Marathon. As you adopt, and as I went into the execution phase, the implementation phase, or the adoption phase of that implementation of that plan, it's not about, all right, in your first week or your first month, you have to run your, 20K or a half marathon in under 2 hours. It's not about that, because you're gonna get injured, you're gonna get tired. It's about the process and trusting the process, trusting the people that are going to help you in the process. In this case, following the analogy, your doctors, the coach, your not just your training plan, but your meal plan, rest,
Yeah.
sleep, all that stuff, recovery, and ensuring that it's sort of like a hockey stick, so that you can not just implement and think about implementing, but adopt the solution the best way possible, but also as you stride to scale it within your organization, because it's very rare nowadays. It was rare 5 years ago. It's almost a unicorn today to find an organization that is going to implement a solution company wide. And that's it. And they're going to do it day one.
Yeah.
Right. So the adoption phase, if it's taken baby steps and you trust the process, when you go to scale it to other teams within your same org, other orgs within the same business unit, say the same region, North America, or other regions within the company, say EMEA, APAC, whatever, LATAM, it's going to be ideally a very, very successful scaling process. That it's not going to be identical, of course, but you need to ask champions of the solution, and as users, and if you see that time to value of you see the value of that platform or of whatever solution you purchased, then scaling it is going to be good for you, for the team, for the business. But you need to trust the process, because you're not going to be able to get to that scale phase and have other colleagues, reap the benefits of this solution if you just don't, run a half marathon or try to run a half marathon under 2 hours in the first week of training.
Yeah, no, I think you summed it up beautifully. I think it's like what you're really talking about there is what we aspire to do, which is creating that kind of sense of normality about the fact that this is just something we do within the organization. And, like your running analogy is perfect, because what you're really talking about is adopting everything around that, whether it's the running itself, whether it's the getting the meal prep right, whether it's like looking after your body in the right way. The reality of what you're really talking about is the fact that that just becomes your norm. The fact that you run is part of your lifestyle. It's part of what you do. And then at that point, because you're not thinking about it, you're just doing it, and you're doing all the right actions, then it doesn't feel onerous. And I think, that is a brilliant analogy for what we're talking about here, is everything just has to feel right. So I'm mindful.
And to finish that analogy, because I think this is going to trickle down to a third episode. So my shirt is not going to be
we're gonna have to get something
enough anymore. So it's the different styles of running too. Are you going to do a marathon? Are you going to be a sprinter? Are you going to be a trail runner? Similar to the scale process, like you can scale one part of the product. What about other parts of the product? So for the client is paramount to respect that process and go back to the implementation, adoption, and scaling phase, similar to runners, and as you go through the motions for the company, it's also important to tie that value to usage.
Yeah, love it. So next time, usage, and we'll be back again for episode 22 then. All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.